Is it possible that the users of a platform, such as the viewers on YouTube, or maybe the content creators on YouTube, or the people who use Google or use Amazon or Facebook, to own the platform, or at least to have a say in the rules that govern the platform? In this video, I really hope to convince you that it might be possible and to give you a vision of what that might look like and other models we've seen that are similar. But before we go there, I think it's worthwhile having a little bit of background on the paradox of power and why this kind of thing might be necessary and important. So paradox of power basically just says, as a person or an organization is rising to power, they have to be very sensitive to the needs of the people that they're serving. Politicians need to listen to people, to express back what they're hearing. Companies that are just starting up need to be really in tune with what people's needs are, what their experiences are of a company or a platform in that early stage. But once companies and people reach power, they don't have to be as sensitive to the needs of the people that they're serving. They kind of have enough influence where if they don't pay as much attention to the people, they can still get by and avoid consequences. That's sort of what power is. And this is a paradox of power. You see this all over the place. So there's government power, there's social power, there's economic power, there's all kinds of power. What does the paradox of power look like for platforms? Because platforms, of course, are just one of the things I talk about a lot on this channel, and they have a lot of power in today's society. In fact, they may even have more power over the governments and the countries where they exist than most people do, including rich people. These platforms are really, really powerful. Now, what is the source of that power? Well, it used to be, if you rewind 100 years, the source of power was sort of in owning the inputs. That's why monopoly has the name it does and goes along with the railroad analogy, because 100 years ago, whoever owned the railroads owned one of the main inputs that you need to create stuff. That's not the case with tech monopolies. With tech monopolies, there's demand-side economies of scale, and that means that the source of their power is the number of people that show up on their network. So people show up on their network in order to access other users of their platform. Now, to get to that place, you have to have a really great user interface and really great algorithms that'll give people what they want. You have to have all this technology that serves the people, and that's created as the platform rises to power. But once it reaches some sort of critical mass of users, really their main source of power is the network of people who show up. And many people have made the argument that the platforms where we spend our social time and where we exchange ideas, those are kind of like town squares. They behave in a way almost as if they're countries or as if they're governments for people where they actually live their lives and spend their time. In which case, why aren't there more governmental structures that sort of allow the people who are part of that space, that country, the country of the internet, to have a say? So let's look at what might that look like for the people or the users to have a government that they have a say in the platforms. All right, now first, before I say this, I do need to acknowledge that there are mechanisms of accountability. Like even Google and Facebook, they do have competition. There's other platforms that do the same thing, in which case they do have to be sensitive to the things that their users are getting upset about. They do have to solve problems that they see people talking about a lot, people getting frustrated with, particularly if they see people moving to other platforms because of bad behavior on the part of the tech monopoly. They're going to pay attention to that, and that is a mechanism of accountability. So I don't want to pretend that there's no accountability built into our current tech monopolies. There's some, but the amount of power accumulated there is such that they don't have to pay as much attention as perhaps we would like. And they can be selective about what types of grievances people have that they pay attention to. For example, they may not want to give us rights to our data. They may not want to give us as much control or transparency in their algorithms as we would like if we were demanding good behavior on their part, if we were a population demanding our rights from them. So There is accountability. I'm not denying that there's not, but there's not quite enough accountability to get us some of the things that we really want. All right, so finally, what does this look like? What would it actually look like for users to have a say in the governance of the platforms? All right, so I have a few examples here. Let's start out with the example of the shopping mall. So the shopping mall is a space where people come and people gather, and different companies come and companies gather. And there's rules that govern the shopping mall space. They want to make sure it feels good. They want to make sure people aren't threatened. They even have their own mall cops police system within the shopping mall. So the shopping mall is actually acting like a mini government, even though it's privately owned. Somebody owns that shopping mall, and they're trying to set the rules to make sure it works for the citizens who go to the mall and for the stores who go to the mall. Now, malls are kind of dead right now, so I know some people in this, who are watching this video, have never experienced a vibrant shopping mall that is kind of where it's happening and where people gather, but back in the 90s, that was what was going on. Now, if we're imagining a shopping mall, we know that people who want to make money own the shopping mall. This is just a property they own, and they hire someone to manage that property who is going to be listening to the needs of the people there, making sure it's some place where a bunch of people like to come. And that's really analogous to the online spaces that the platforms are giving us. They have rules, they have guidelines, they have ways of determining which companies come in and which go out, which types of people are going to be thrown out for what kinds of behaviors. And it's sort of with the goal in mind of making it a hospitable space for the people who are going to make money for the mall or money for the platform. Another similar analogy with the malls and the online platforms is that there's different types of users. So the mall has people who go through the mall, but it also has sellers. It's got stores that show up and rent that space. As a matter of fact, the main source of income for the mall is the stores. But if you're going to be thinking about how do you make more money from the stores, you also need to be thinking about how do you get more people in the door, more traffic in the door. So it's not just that they're paying attention to the stores, they're paying attention to what do people like to experience in their mall, what kind of decorations, what kind of atmosphere, what kind of architecture is going to make people feel like it's a hip place to be so that you can attract the stores to the mall. And that's very analogous to platforms. Platforms oftentimes have different types of users, like Amazon has sellers and buyers. And there's a different contractual relationship between the owner of the space, just like the owner of the mall, and the owner of the platform. And the users of the space and the different types. And sometimes you charge one type of user and not another. There's lots of different ways of making money on platforms, but the mall analogy here I think is a good way of visualizing what's going on. So can you imagine a situation where the stores get upset at the owner of the mall for rules that it considers to be unjust? So this might be something like maybe the mall is imposing Christmas as a theme on the mall, and the owners of the stores are sort of like, we don't like that value being imposed on us, we don't like having to constantly stare Jesus statues in the face during that time of year. Lots of reasons you might object to that. Or you can imagine rules about protests that would happen in the mall where protesters might come in. That would make people feel unsafe at the mall. That would make users not want to go to the mall. If the owner of the mall said, we're fine with protests, you might imagine the stores sort of getting together and saying, we're losing money because of that, people don't want to come here, so we'd like to push back. Now, you don't hear a lot of stories like this about malls, even from the 1980s and 90s, because it's such a small endeavor. And the rules back then, well, I don't really remember what went on back then, but all right, to finish off this example, think about what if the stores in the mall got really upset at the rules and decided to buy up the mall. So how could that possibly happen? Well, one way it could happen is the stores could say, okay, there's a price tag on this mall. If we outbid the selling price of this mall, we can buy it from the current owner. the companies that buy space in the mall could get together and say, we're going to band together, we're going to pool the money to purchase the mall, and as a matter of fact, maybe we'll pool it by square feet of stores. So if you're a bigger store, you have to pool more money to reach that dollar amount to buy up the mall. Or maybe it's evenly distributed, everybody pays the same amount, as long as that amount adds up to the price of the mall. They pool their money, they buy the mall, now they collectively own it, in which case they could say, well, it's kind of onerous to govern the mall because then we have to hire janitors and make decisions about decorations, and that's not really what we want to do. We just want a say in the rules that are governing our space. So maybe they elect a board where maybe there's going to be 12 people on a board of directors for the mall. That board of directors is going to hire a mall manager, and the mall manager will make all those little decisions. But the 12 board of directors are going to advocate for the interests of the people who elected them. And you could do that. That would give the store owners in the mall a way of voting on someone who can advocate for their own interests. So if they really care about not having Christmas decorations or not having protesters of a certain type, or if they care about any issue like that, they could have a say. Now, you notice this model is actually kind of similar to the model of shared ownership of a company, like shareholders. Companies are sometimes owned by one person or two people, but oftentimes they're owned by a collective group of people who each owns one little share of the company. And each person who owns a share does not want to be involved in the management and the rule setting and the governance of that company. Rather, they just want to vote on someone who will advocate for their interests. Now, in that case, their interests are just making more money, so pretty simple, as is the case with the mall store owners. But with the case of platforms, it's very similar in the sense that we could have users vote on a board of directors to advocate for user interests. Even though the users have other motives besides profit maximization, we want the platform to be a good space for us to live and spend time. We want it to be a space that does not negatively impact our mental health, negatively impact our society. We want all those things. We could vote people onto a board of directors to advocate for those interests that we really care about. Are there examples that are not profit maximization? Because the mall example is profit maximization, the shareholder example is profit maximization. But of course, this is exactly how governments work. Governments have ownership of a space, for example, national parks. We collectively, as a society, own the national parks. Post offices, they own all kinds of spaces that we elect people to decide on who manages those spaces and to set out rules for managing those spaces. So we have a say in how those spaces are managed. Now, it's kind of similar, except when we elect our national government representatives, there's so many decisions they're thinking about. If we were to elect representatives onto a board of directors for a platform, that would be a smaller space. Now, there's a lot of rules in that space, there's a lot of contracts involved in the space, but still, I'm trying to give you a vision of what it might look like for users to vote on people to be on a board of directors for these platforms, where that board of directors would provide rules to govern the platforms, techniques for managing the platforms, rights of users of the platforms. How transparent are algorithms on the platform? What kinds of things about the platform are publicly available and transparent? And what kinds of things are protected, perhaps for privacy reasons? That board could determine monetization mechanisms, and it could determine what groups are hired to fix parts of the platform and to invest money into the platform. Now, this gets at the idea of money. Could you have private investors investing in different parts of the platform while not having the power to decide on rules that have to do with the rights of users or rules that govern the space that really should be more democratically decided? And the answer is yeah. I mean, we see this all the time, right? We see governments that say, oh, we need some project to fix our national park here. We've got some issue, the trails need updated. let's hire a contractor to do that. And as a matter of fact, we can put out a request for proposals and have people submit bids saying, I'll do that for you. Here's what I'll do. Here's the quality. Here are the accountability metrics, and the government decides which one works for it. So the vision I'm trying to give you is not one of a fully government-run platform, but it's one where the users have certain rights that they get to vote on democratically. And it could be that the board of directors that's voted on by the users doesn't have the right to make every decision. Maybe certain types of investment decisions get made by a different board that's overseeing something going on for investors. But that board of directors that users vote on, that would have the power to protect rights, to protect transparency of algorithms, and to give us some of the things that profit-maximizing companies are not wanting to give users right now. So I hope that gives you a basic vision of how this might happen. Now, do we ever have cases where there's two separate boards that oversee different types of decisions? Yeah, we see that kind of thing some places. For example, insurance companies. Insurance companies oftentimes in the US are profit-maximizing, but they often work with a separate board that determines the formulary. Now, formulary is a big concept I'm not going to go into in this video, but it's basically the list of drugs that are covered at a lower out-of-pocket cost to the patient. And ideally, you would want that formulary determined by people who understand the medicine and who are advocating for the patients. And that's what they do. The board that determines the formulary for an insurance company is sort of separated out, and they determine how the formulary works. Now, they may be weighing sort of benefits to the patient with economic negotiation power for the insurers to keep down prices in other areas, but this board is more independent and is charged with protecting the rights of the people in a way that the insurance company board is not. And those two boards can both operate separately and interact in a way at the same time. Now, I'm not saying it's a perfect setup. There's going to be problems, there's going to be issues. What I'm trying to do here is really to lay out a vision of how the technology sector might be organized differently to better serve the people. So this is just one vision to get you thinking. There's issues with the vision, it's imperfect, but when we're thinking about platforms, what this might look like would be the network of people who come together on the platform, and the main platform, the rules of that main platform might be governed by the users of the platform. And then the management of the platform, or sort of the services given to the platform, and perhaps even the monetization mechanism, that could be managed by a different board, which was perhaps more accountable to a profit maximization model. Those two groups might have tension, it might create some inefficiencies to have these groups separated, but it could end up protecting society to separate these out in a way that might be worth trying. Now, last thing here is we want to envision how could this actually happen? We've got all these profit maximizing platforms out there. Could the people overtake one of them? How could that even happen? Well, I gave you the example of the mall, where a bunch of the stores in the mall were upset at the rules that were governing the mall, so they band together and bought up the mall space. There's a market price for that. They could pool their money and they could buy it up. The question is, could that happen with one of these big platforms? Is that possible? But I just want to say, I think it's possible. I think we're going to have to explore with different mechanisms. My videos are really just throwing out ideas because we need to start brainstorming ideas. Any idea can be shot down. If you're afraid of ideas being shot down, you're never going to make progress. And I think just not enough ideas are being thrown out there, so I'm going to be throwing out some ideas because why not?